Well, we're just down from Willie the Walleye here in Baudette at the DNR area headquarters, and behind us is the Rainy River. Now, this has become just a world-class lake sturgeon fishery, and that's due to a couple of things. The cleanup that took place here, the recovery efforts, including the Clean Waters Act back in the 1970s, and then a lot of research that's being done by the Minnesota DNR. So while this is a popular area to target sturgeon in the spring, we're here in August. We're gonna head out on the river with the DNR to go check these nets for sturgeon.
We went out yesterday, set different gill nets out on the river as part of our juvenile sturgeon and just general Rainy River survey. Ideally, we're looking for kind of that juvenile stage sturgeon. So we have 2 different sites to check today with 3 different nets at each site.
Now, part of this process will involve some bycatch, catching walleyes, suckers, sauger, and other fish in those nets. But those fish are becoming a vital part of their research as well. So we're out here on the river at your nets that you set out yesterday.
Yep.
What's the next step here?
So we're gonna lift these nets. We're starting on the downstream side. So we have 3 different nets in the water. We're gonna start with our 2.5 inch mesh. So it's about 100 feet long, and this one's set perpendicular to the shoreline. Then the next one's what we call an experimental gill net. So there's 250 feet long of net, all strung together, and there's 5 different panels of mesh in that gill net that range from 3/4 inch all the way up to 2 inch mesh. So it's gonna catch a variety of different fish. We're doing kind of 2 surveys in one today. So we're doing a population assessment on the Rainy River itself. So we're looking at walleye and sauger numbers, sizes, ages, as well as juvenile sturgeon. So these nets are really good at catching smaller sturgeon. We'll tag them from here and take length and weights on them. As they get tangled in the net, sometimes the net rubs on them a little bit, and they get kind of like a rug burn. But they have really hard skin, kind of like a leathery type of skin, and some rough scales, so they're typically not an issue for them. Yeah, so this is a juvenile sturgeon. So you can see a lot of times they're kind of this lighter sandy color compared to the adults, are more darker. And you can see the scoots on its side here on the top are really sharp. When they're younger, they're I guess fresher scales, so they still have that sharp feel to them, so we like wearing gloves when we're handling them. And then as they get older and kind of rub up against different stuff in the river and just live their life, they kind of start wearing those scoots down.
All right. Lake sturgeon, 2.5 inch. 633.
So each one of these sturgeon that we get, we wand them with it's called a pit tag reader. So we have pit tags in a lot of these smaller fish. It's basically like the same type of microchip you'd see like in a dog that you get from a vet. It just has a unique number that identifies that fish. And we use these on our smaller fish because they're really small. They're kind of just slightly larger than a grain of rice that we inject into them with a little syringe. So if we recapture them again, we can look at how much they've grown since the last time we've captured them. And then once they get to be a certain size, then we put what's called a Carlson tag in them, which is the external tag that you can see when you're fishing. It's a yellow kind of dangler tag off their dorsal fin. So if we did detect a pit tag on this one, we'd write down the tag number, and then we would add that we put a Carlson on it because it was over 600 millimeters, so it's big enough. The reason why we wait till they're 600 millimeters is just you don't want them, when they're smaller, to have this hindrance that would limit their ability to swim.
We're gonna take this leading fin spine. This is a way to age the sturgeon. Slight clip. and it pulls right off.
So we use a low-speed saw, like a diamond blade saw that spins fairly slow, and you can cut a little slice off the end of it, and then you can age it like a tree. There's rings on it. The sturgeon fishing on the Rainy River is pretty good. I mean, we've met a lot of our recovery goals for sturgeon population in the river. The last goal of our recovery plan is to see an 80-incher, and a lot of us, we've kind of debated whether it's out there, and if it's not out there, it probably will be soon.
Yeah.
But I would think that there's got to be one. We do yearly monitoring, netting for tagging fish and stuff, and we're seeing pretty diverse year classes. That was one of the things in our recovery goals, is having several year classes, and that's one of the things we get from taking our age structures, those fin rays, is we can determine the years that the fish were born, and then we can kind of backlog it. So we've seen several year classes, and that's kind of what we've done with our survey this year with these juveniles, is just kind of continuing that, making sure we're still seeing spawning occurring, recruitment happening in the population.
Sauger, 234, 40. So we're going to be pulling the otoliths out of the sauger, which is a structure similar to like an ear bone if you compare it to humans, and that's the way that you can get the age from these fish.
So this would be part of that Rainy River evaluation I was talking about earlier. We wouldn't normally do this if we were just looking at sturgeon, but since we're already setting nets, it makes sense for us to
utilize some of the bycatch that we're getting.
Yep.
Walleye, 282, male, immature. So the testes or the ovaries are kind of what you look for, and it's going to be really small. But this is a undeveloped testes basically. Super skinny, small, red, and then the females will be a little more fleshy, a little bit larger at this size, and then clearly when they're mature, the ovaries will be full of eggs.
Now that we went out and collected all the different aging structures and stuff, so we'll go back and we can look at each site, how many fish we caught at each site. We can compare that to historical catches in that river section. We can get ages off those fish that we took a fin ray from, so we can go back and look when those fish were born. We can look at river conditions when they were born to see, are there thresholds that sturgeon need as far as flow or river level to have a successful spawning year. For the walleye and sauger, we can look at ages on those as well with the otoliths that we took, and we can look at the amount of growth that they've had in the river. We can look at length at age. So 2-year-old fish, how long are they in the river compared to the lake? Are there differences there? Is it the same population? Along with the sturgeon too, we can look at now that we have an age and a length for them, when we capture them, if they get recaptured again down the line, we can look at how much it's grown. So another way we research these fish is we have what's called acoustic transmitters in these adult fish. And basically what those do is they send out a coded ping, and we have receivers intermittently throughout the river. As a fish swims by one of these receivers, the receivers are listening for those pings, and when it sends it out, it can recognize that sequence of pings. It'll have an ID number associated with that fish, so we can tell when a fish swims past a certain receiver. And then we have this box here too that allows us to basically put in what's called a hydrophone into the water, which can also listen for those signals. We can kind of track fish individually as they move throughout the river system, and we have receivers out on Lake of the Woods as well right now too, so we can kind of track them all the way from International Falls Dam all the way down the Rainy River into the lake. We don't have a whole lot of data on juvenile fish, so kind of understanding where they're hanging out throughout the year and what kind of habitat they prefer throughout the year. And then for the adults, we know some spawning areas. We're kind of looking to see, are there other spawning areas that they're using? And then looking at like when they're spawning, are they going from site to site? The timing of when they move up for spawning in the springtime and when they leave. If they leave right after spawning, where do they go? Do they go, you know, all the way to the lake? Do they just kind of coast down? Just kind of understanding overall what are they doing on a year-to-year basis, kind of at different stages of their life.
That should code
That's a fish.
for sure.
39542.
Fish 39542 was 19.1 inches when it was originally tagged on August 14th of 2024 near the Vitus boat ramp. And including today, it was detected 3 more times near Bedet in August of 2025.
We had one fish that, you know, went from the Big Falls area all the way down out into like the woods in just a couple days. So, and we've had some fish that prefer to stay in the river. They haven't really left the river, or they hang out kind of by 4 Mile Bay down by the lake. Some fish move a lot and some fish don't move a lot. And we're looking at, do they come up the same river every year? Are they Rainy River fish only coming up the Rainy, or are they straying? We don't have a whole lot of data on juvenile sturgeons, so that's why us being able to tag some of these younger fish and seeing where they hang out before do they go to the lake right away? Are they hanging out in the river for a couple years until they get big enough? Just getting an idea of where those are hanging out. It seems like, just from our preliminary data, a lot of them hang out in the river and for the first couple years before they start moving out into the lake environment. But there's obviously fish that move more than others.
It's research like this that builds a world-class fishery, and we have one right here for sturgeon on the Rainy River.